an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Robopocalypse, Part 3, Chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7, and the intro to Part 4, Awakening. Chaperone Duty, Tickler, Band-A-Emir, and Backbone. In these chapters, it turns out that the robots are experimenting on people and making them cyborgs, and I swear to God, this is going to give me nightmares. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Krista for commissioning this episode. Krista is here in the chat with me. So, everybody, Krista, I'm going to start off talking about how upset I am, and you'll just bear with me and it'll be fine. So this first chapter out of this grouping, Chaperone Duty, is from the perspective of Marcus Johnson, who I think is a new person. Am I wrong? Have we met Marcus before? And Marcus gets tipped off by a tin can alarm. Oh, okay. Krista says he's the construction husband. Thank you. I did not realize that. There is a person around that is looking for a group, basically, to help them. And this dude is acting really weird, and this really set my alarms going. He's got this, injury on his arm that he's hiding, and if this were a zombie book, I would be like, that bitch got bit, stay away. He's hiding a bite. That was what I kept thinking. I was like, what could it possibly be that he's trying to hide like this? And I kept thinking, does he have a tracker embedded, or is he carrying a phone and he doesn't want him to see? I was playing with the idea that he had been modified, but I just didn't want to think that's what was happening because it's horrifying. And then it turns out that's what it is. You guys, anything medical is absolutely triggering for me in this way that I'm not certain I understand. It's the kind of thing that my mother would claim was due to trauma in a past life. Not that I buy that, but it's the kind of thing that, well, that's as good an explanation as anything, because I genuinely don't know why I have this reaction. But I can't with, this is something that I struggled a lot with. I did a project when I was in high school, and we were studying the Holocaust, and we all had to choose a figure from World War II to do a report on. And not knowing what I was getting into, I chose Joseph Goebbels. I think I chose him because he was a side player in a lot of ways. So I thought that it would be a little bit more offbeat and interesting because it was something that a lot of people didn't explore in the things that I had read. It was a bad call, really upsetting, incredibly disturbing. For those who aren't aware, he was basically a, quote, doctor, and I'm putting that in hyper quotes, who was in charge of a lot of the experimentation on prisoners. And those experiments varied wildly. Like, there were ones where, we're just going to pour various, like, toxins and acids and things in people's eyes to see if we can turn their eyes blue. Or we're going to put somebody in a freezing bath and see how long it takes them to die from hypothermia. Like, just random shit that it was genuinely like, you're not actually researching anything. You're just torturing people and pretending it's for research. And we can tell it's very obvious. And that's also always been something that, like, bothered me in horror stories and stuff. I can deal with ghosts in haunted houses. I can deal with, like, demon possession. Like, that shit does not get to me because it doesn't feel real. You know, and it's weird because, like, I believe in ghosts, but still those stories don't feel real. But when you start to get into, like, there are ghosts haunting this asylum, for example, or this old abandoned hospital, because they were subjected to horrific treatment in the name of medical care in an era that didn't understand mental health or trauma. Those are the ones that really fuck me up. The number of things that we allow as a society in the name of science, and I am somebody who fully backs science, and I am like, I understand its value, and I believe in that, but we also can divorce compassion so completely from it, and I find that really disturbing. And all you have to do is, like, look at fairly recent U.S. history to see how we, like, American doctors would target communities of color and do all kinds of experimentation without consent because those people didn't matter, had no recourse or representation. And so just all of that just really freaks me out. So when we get to a story later where what's-her-face is, like, sees her daughter Matilda undergoing basically, like, robotic surgery to replace her eyes, fully replace her daughter's eyes. I'll admit it was so horrifying. And the only thing that relieved the horror was the fact that Matilda doesn't seem to have experienced any pain. She's, like, unaware of what happened to her. And when her mother interrupts, Matilda isn't like, thank you for saving me, exactly. She's just confused and is like, Mom, what's going on? My eyes feel weird. And she doesn't even say my eyes hurt or my vision's really weird, like what I can't see. She just says they feel weird. And then as things go on, it's really clear, like, evidently she either totally didn't feel that because of some, maybe, I guess what I'm saying is, I fully expected that whatever Rob decided to do to people regarding these, like, robotic implants would be done without any pain medication, without any concern for the comfort of the victim at all. And instead it seems as if they are very comfortable as they're undergoing this. And the surgeries, it's like we're seeing Matilda. I don't know how many unsuccessful surgeries preceded her is the thing. How much did Rob have to experiment before he got it right? Or did he? He has access to all this knowledge. Perhaps he got it right immediately. I don't know. But I was just relieved that Matilda seemed to not be incredibly traumatized by it. It seems like it was almost more traumatizing for her mother watching this happen and not knowing what it was doing to her daughter, and then seeing her daughter's eyes were literally gone. So there was some, like, I was sort of relieved in that respect, but still the whole idea of this, it's so, like, it's so upsetting. It really is. Krista says he's been doing this with robotic surgery being a thing. Do you mean Rob has been doing this? And you mean, are you saying that, like, he was successful immediately? because we have surgery using robots. Oh, I mean, yeah, we have surgery using robots, but we're not creating cyborgs. So that's what I mean. It's like, I wasn't certain that his like implanting a fucking like robot hand or robot eyes would work right out of the gate. Like, have there been failed experiments where somebody's eyes have been replaced and it was horribly painful, or they got some sort of like infection and died? Like, who knows? You know, we might find out. It might be in the book. But as of right now, I'm just sort of sitting there like wondering in this morbid way how long it took to get this right, you know? So anyway, this was just like, it didn't occur to me that it would go in this direction, and it makes a ton of sense. And we also see how it's like weaponized, because it's sort of unclear in this first section, the chaperone duty. I don't think the guy actually shares what his name is. This young Latino guy that Marcus runs into, he is like worried about the fact that he tried to join up with a crew once and they rejected him. And I mean, it's fucked up because this is obviously not this guy's choice. But also, as we see a little bit later, people can be implanted with bugs that are something that can be detonated, like a fucking bomb, or at least cause the person to be trackable. And so the instinct that humans have to reject a person who has these kinds of alterations, as much as it's like incredibly sad, it's understandable why you would just be like, yeah, no, I'm sorry. That is not going to happen. So this dude, like when Marcus runs across him, it has been crying, and Marcus anticipates the arm as like the way that this man has been crying and his reaction to them saying, we're going to get your arm looked at. He thinks that this guy suffered some trauma to his arm, and maybe that's why he's crying, or he is sort of embarrassed by his injury. And this is one of those things where he says, strange how being hurt can be embarrassing. And it's like, honestly, that's not the case here, but it is true, especially in a situation like this where people are fighting for your lives. Even if it isn't your fault that you got injured, you feel like a burden, you know, and like people shouldn't have to like slow down and risk themselves to care for me, kind of thing. So he asks the guy's name, dude won't say, and we get this description of this new, as he calls it, walker. And I'm going to read this here. After we dynamited half the city, the regular old domestic robots couldn't balance well enough to get to us. We were safe for a while, long enough to get established underground and inside demolished buildings. But then a new walker showed up. We call it a mantis. It's got 4 multi-jointed legs longer than telephone poles and molded out of some kind of carbon fiber honeycomb. Its feet look like upside-down ice axes, slicing into the ground on every step. Up top, where the legs meet, it's got a couple of little arms with 2 ice axe hands. Those razor arms tear through wood and drywall and brick. Whole thing sort of scurries, all doubled over and hunched down to the size of a small pickup truck. Looks kind of like a praying mantis. I don't think so, kids. Nope. I think I'm gonna, Once we start getting into this sort of creature, and I'm gonna call it a creature, I understand it's robotic, don't care. I would be like the kind of person that'd be like, guess I'll die. Like, there comes a point where I am not gonna hide from giant robotic spiders. Okay? I will die. Just let me die. It's fine. I just want to check out. Bye. I just honestly, like, I don't have kids. It's fine. No big deal. Bye. Fine. Just, we all have our line, and that's mine. Giant robotic spiders that can break down buildings. That's where I draw my line. And I am not interested in passing beyond that point. No problem. It's fine. So, this fucking thing too. A mantis has a good eye for unnatural things like words and drawings, even shit like happy faces. Uncamouflaged tripwires never work. Lines are too straight. Writing directions to a safe house on the wall is a good way to get people deleted. But a pile of rubble is invisible, and a pile of rocks going from big to small is too. And I really thought that in particular was chilling, because it didn't occur to me how difficult it would be to keep a secret when they can interpret language and handwriting, you know? And I'm certain that you could like code it, but then it's a fucking machine that will probably be able to decode shit in a millisecond, you know? Like you can find websites now that you can enter in random assortments of letters and numbers, and they will attempt to decode it automatically for you. So every time that I kind of am like, well, you could do this, the author is like, no, you can't. I thought of that. We're definitely not able to just do that, but, you know, keep telling yourself whatever, I guess. So this dude begins to follow Marcus, and he is realizing at one point, let's see, how much change can a person absorb before everything loses meaning? Living for its own sake isn't life. People need meaning as much as they need air. Thank God I've still got Dawn. I'm picturing her hazel eyes in my head when I notice the gray-green telephone pole slanting cockeyed at the end of the street. The pole bends in the middle and shifts, and I realize it's a leg. We're going to die inside 30 seconds if we stay out here. So, we then get a chase scene. And a clawed arm shoots through the window frame and rips downward, gouging out part of the wall. Another clawed arm follows. Back and forth, it's like a tornado hitting. Lucky for us, this is a safe building. I can tell because it's been hollowed out pretty good. The facade is demolished, but inside it's passable. We do our homework in New York City. I steer the kid toward a pile of cinder blocks and a hole in the wall that leads into an adjacent building. So that's pretty fun, is that, like, you know, they have areas where they have made it as safe as possible so that shit doesn't just, like, collapse on you, and things have been cleared out and made easy to get through, and they lead in a certain direction. Then I hear carpet ripping and the crunch of wooden furniture. The mantis has somehow made it through the window. Crouched small, it's squeezing its gray mass through the building, tearing stained ceiling tiles down like confetti. Crouch walking, the thing is all flashing claws and screeching metal. We dash for the hole in the wall. I stop and help the kid crawl over the mess of rebar and concrete. The passage is just a gaping hollow only a few feet wide that leads straight through the sandstone foundation of both buildings. So, long story short, this dude gets a piece of rebar through the calf. And he has this moment of like, either you're going to have to help get the rebar out of my leg, or you're going to have to pull the rebar out of the wall. Either way, he's just like, you're obviously helping me, right? And then he looks and sees that this dude is standing there looking like he's going to start crying. And he interprets this understandably as this dude being so frightened that he, like, because of the attack that they are under from the mantis, that he is, like, stymied into inaction. But it turns out that this dude is, like, internally coping with the fact that he's going to have to out himself in a second. So the kid says, "I'm sorry." Eyes locked on mine, the kid holds his injured arm up. He starts to unwrap the towel that covers it. The kid's hand isn't hurt. He doesn't have one. Instead, the meat of his forearm ends with a mess of wires leading to a greasy hunk of metal with 2 blades sticking out. It looks like a pair of industrial-sized scissors. The tool is fused directly into his arm. As I watch, a tendon flexes in his forearm and the oiled blades begin to spread apart. "I'm a freak," he says. "Rob did this to me in the labor camps." And it says, I lower my head and stare at the ceiling. And this dude's fucking, like, robot scissors were strong enough to literally just snip through the fucking rebar. That's too sharp. I'm just gonna say it. No, sir. What? It's weird because, like, it's almost like Rob is giving people the means to fight back. And that's not to say that there isn't probably fail-safes and shit built into some of these things, but, like, later on, Matilda, she can see into the machines in such a way that it helps them survive and escape. And I'm really wondering at this point, like, is Rob doing this on purpose? Is he wanting some people? Like, because the whole thing with Rob is that, allegedly, Rob and Arcos, if we say that they are the same being, which I guess they are, the whole thing is like, I'm trying to find a new way for us to coexist. So is that his idea that, like, I know, I'll turn people into partially robots, and then they won't be able to hate robots anymore because they'll be partially robots themselves, or they will grow so dependent on their robot parts that they'll, like, I don't know. I don't see it, because you've just, like, forcibly mutilated and altered people against their will. So I don't know that that is going to be effective. I don't know. Krista is in the chat. Magneto was right? ? Look, he was, though. Like, honestly, I'm not mad at Magneto. I have felt this for a long time. The only time that I have never been on Magneto's side, spoilers for one of the many X-Men movies, is when Mystique gets injected with the cure, unquote, and he's like, "You're not one of us anymore," and just fucking leaves her there. That's the only time that I was like, whoa, fuck you, Magneto. And otherwise I was just like, no, you're right. I'm just like 100%. Other than that, that was the one time that I was not on his side. And otherwise, just like every time, he's just right. Oh, well, what can you do? This is a thing that happens so much in comics, though. They have a villain, and the villain's just a little bit too correct. And they wind up having to be like, oh, make him do something fucked up. Gotta do, like inexcusably fucked up. Not like the moderate fucked up we've been doing, because that's a little bit too excusable. So anyway, they get out, they leave the Mantis behind, and Marcus starts asking the kid about his arm. He says, labor camp. People go into surgery, come out different. I was one of the first. Mine's simple, just my arm. Other people, though, they come back from the autodoc even worse. No eyes, no legs. Rob messes with your skin, your muscles, your brain. I'm like, your brain? What the fuck's he doing to your brain? I don't like that. Look, I don't really want any robot parts. If I was gonna pick a robot part, I'd probably pick my eyes, because that feels like it would be the coolest looking and also would be like practically useful a lot. I feel like too much of the world is built around having like opposable thumbs. So having scissor hands, for example, sounds really tiresome. I would definitely not pick that. I definitely wouldn't choose to replace my legs, because I want to be wearing my mini skirts, and I feel like that look wouldn't really, unless I like had a very specific look that I chose to go with, I feel like that would be interfering. That said, I don't know how much you can make your like robotic legs look like human legs, because maybe it would be something that you could like, yeah, you've got robot legs, but nobody can tell. Doesn't seem like Rob's worried about the aesthetic though. So, you know, I'm just saying. otherwise, like, maybe a robot heart would be good, because then you could just have like a really constant heart rate with your, like, while you're exercising, or maybe robot lungs so that you could breathe like consistently and evenly during, I don't know, but there's not a lot that I would want to replace. And plus I have really bad eyesight. So I feel like robot eyes, it would just feel like an upgrade, like LASIK plus, you know, you just get some bonus stuff. And yeah, you would look kind of freaky, but like, as long as you don't get rid of my eyelids and I can still like blink and stuff, I feel like I'd be all right with that. I don't know. I'd get some really nice like fake eyelashes over it, and who's even going to notice? Whatever. Anyway, he asks whether this dude is on his own, and he says, I met some others, but they didn't want. He looked at his mutilated hand, face empty. I'm like them now. Being alone is tough, I say. You start to wonder what the point is, you know? But there's other people here. You're not alone now. You've got a purpose. And he says, I'm not even. He holds up his arm. And Marcus stops and says, you were born a human being and you're going to die one, no matter what they did to you or what they do. Understand? Yeah, he says. I throw an arm around the kid's shoulder, wincing at the pain in my leg. Good, I say. Now come on. We've got to get home and eat. You wouldn't guess it to look at me, but I've got this beautiful wife, best looking woman in the world, and I'm telling you, if you ask real nice, she will cook up a stew like you wouldn't believe. And it says, in the coming months, more and more modified humans began to filter into the city. No matter what Rob did to these people, all of them were welcomed into the NYC resistance. Without this haven and its lack of prejudice, it's unlikely that the human resistance, including Bright Boy Squad, would have been able to acquire and take advantage of an incredibly powerful secret weapon. 14-year-old Matilda Perez. So, this is like one of those things that I really would like to hear about, and I'm hoping we will later on, is like, after the war is over, what do people who have these alterations decide to do? Because I'm really curious whether or not it's like, and I'm sure it varies, but whether people's first instinct is to like, oh my God, get this thing out of me. Or if they're just like, well, it's not like I fucking have a hand to replace it with. Like, if I get rid of this thing that I've learned to function with, I'd have to relearn a whole new way of living or seeing or whatever. And maybe just keep it. I could understand wanting to keep it. I could understand wanting to get rid of it. Krista says, worth noting, Marcus and Dawn are black. Oh, okay. Is that mentioned anywhere? I will say the one thing that I was a little bit like, when I was thinking back on this book so far, she says, yeah, first time we see them. Okay. I am a little bit saddened that there aren't more female POVs. It's all dudes except for Laura, and she, like, this section with her is the last time that we see her, evidently, and she is so maternal that it feels like a little bit of a cheat, because that's so often what happens, is that female characters get reduced to like motherhood. And that's not to say that, you know, it's not a valid thing, but it is a little bit of something that I noticed, where I was just like, man, we don't really see from the point of view of women often in this so far. That may change. I don't know. But so when we go to her section, the next chapter, Tickler, it starts off with a commentary from Cormac, New War plus 10 months. As our squad continued to travel west towards Grey Horse, we met a wounded soldier named Leonardo. We nursed Leo back to health, and he told us about hastily built forced labor camps placed just outside larger cities. Massively outnumbered from the start, it seems that Big Rob leveraged the threat of death to convince huge numbers of people to enter these camps and stay there. Under extreme duress, Laura Perez, former congresswoman, related this story of her experience in one such labor camp. Under extreme duress, what does that mean? She didn't want to tell them what happened for some reason. And I'm very curious about that. Of the imprisoned millions, a lucky few were bound to escape. Others were forced to. And when this starts, it's sort of like in media res. She wakes up in this field, standing she doesn't like wake up like she was asleep or unconscious. She's standing and like kind of comes back to herself and is like, what the fuck is going on? And she can't figure out where she is or what's happening. And all of a sudden she remembers her children and realizes that she needs to get back to them. That's what the emotion in her is telling her. And she sees somebody moving at the tree line. And when he comes toward her and asks her where she comes from, and she says she doesn't remember, he tells her to check her body for lumps. And she doesn't know what he means, but she goes ahead and she feels something on her thigh. There's a bump on my leg, I say. The man begins to back away into the woods. What does that mean? Where are you going? I'm sorry, lady. Rob's bugged you. There's a human work camp a few miles from here. They're using you as bait. Don't try to follow me. Sorry. So she asks how to get to the work camp. And he tells her, and she's like, all right, I guess I'm going back there. And she touches the lump and she can feel it moving. And this is like one of those like horrible things where I, on the one hand, am 100% behind that she made the right decision here. And I would like to think this is what I would also do. But it's also so brutal and awful. The wound is farther up my leg, close to my hip. I think whatever it is moving, or at least it can move if it wants to. So she walks for a while in the direction that he tells her to go, and eventually comes across the chain link fence that she is pretty sure is guarding the labor camp. A weird sliding sensation in my leg reminds me that I'm carrying the bug. That man didn't want to help me because of it. It stands to reason the bug must be telling the machines where I'm at, so it can catch and kill other people. I watch the pulsing lump under my skin with a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. There's no way I can keep going with the bug under there. I've got to do something about this, and it's going to hurt. So, she presses one rock into her thigh to hold the lump in place, basically, since it can move around. The bug starts to move, but before it can go anywhere, I close my eyes and think of Matilda, and with all my might, I slam the other rock down. Ugh! A knot of pain flares in my leg, and I hear a crunch. I bring down the rock 3 more times before I roll over onto the ground, screaming in pain. I lie on my back, chest heaving, looking at blue sky through tears. Yeah, that sucks. Oh, God. It's basically like, yeah, I have to beat this thing out of my body. Whatever it is looks like a blunt metal slug with dozens of quivering, barbed feet. It must have cut through my leg on the first hit because part of its shell has been mashed into the pulped outside layer of my skin. And she can smell this like kind of chemical smell and realizes, oh, it had some sort of like combustible liquid inside it. It was a bomb. And somehow the way that she hit it kept it from exploding. Like it could have gone really wrong and she could have blown herself up, but she got really lucky. And I have to imagine, because she says, I noticed it has a cylindrical shell on the other side that isn't broken. So I think this might be either a precursor or the same as the little guys that we see in the prologue, that they have a chemical reaction between the two halves, and she just smashed the one side, and so it kept it from exploding. So she wraps her leg up and she keeps going in. And this is one of those like moments where I think about who I am as a person, and I'm pretty sure I'd wind up in a labor camp because it seems like it would be the most stable, reliable thing in a lot of ways. You know that you're going to get fed. You know that you're going to be able to like sleep, and you'd be, to a degree, there's a security in knowing what's going to happen to you. But there's also the fact that people are randomly getting taken aside to be experimented on. If I knew that was a thing, would I still be game to do this? I don't know. And then there are times where I'm like, I think that I know what I would do, and then in the moment I have a totally different reaction than I would expect. So I feel like, looking in from the outside, that I would probably wind up going to, like, submitting to a labor camp. But then I'm like, would I? Or would I die earlier? And that wouldn't even be an option for me. You know, like thinking about what all went down with Marcus and Dawn. Their instinct was, or at least Dawn's, was to go to the forest. And Marcus was the one who was like, girl, no, this is a bad idea. But I would have gone to the forest, and that would have indeed proved to be a bad idea. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. So, I don't know. I probably wouldn't even have to worry about making a choice like this because I'd be dead already. I don't feel like I'm somebody who's like cut out for surviving in an apocalyptic scenario. I certainly feel like I can hold my own in a fight, but that's not what's happening here, you know? So Camp Scar is what this is called. And I'm like, is that what it's called, or is that what she's calling it? I'm curious about it. I have to imagine it's what everybody called it. Like, and I don't mean everybody like Rob, but I mean like probably that's something that other prisoners began to call it. I don't know. And she sees all of these bodies that are like littering the ground around the outside of the fencing because they were all trying to help and they all got killed. If you work hard and stay in line, the machines feed you and keep you warm and alive. You learn to ignore the sharp crack of the sentry guns. You look for the carrot and stop seeing the stick. Off to one side of the compound, I see a wavering brown line. People. It's a line of people being marched here from another place. So she slips into the line here, and somebody notices that she wasn't part of the group initially. And one of the guys asks, where do you come from? And there's a kid in the group that immediately, when she says a work camp, he's like, wait, like a concentration camp? And so evidently, like, as much as this is something that's been going on, everybody doesn't know about it, which makes sense because we find out later that most communication has been knocked out. That's purposeful. It keeps people from organizing and getting the information. Like, if word gets around that humans are being rounded up and sent to concentration camps, then your tactics are going to change in order to avoid that fate. But if you're not aware that's even a possibility, then why would you? And I wasn't like, when we hear the work camps being mentioned in the beginning of this book, that was certainly the first time I had ever considered that as an option, because I was genuinely like in the same boat as this little kid who's like, why do they need us to work? They could just use machines. And Laura says we're cheaper than building machines. And the businessman says, not really. We require a lot of resources, like food. And she says there's plenty of food left over in the cities. With the reduced population, I'm sure they can make our leftovers last for years. I'm curious. I don't feel like that it's that simple. I feel like probably partially she's correct in being able to use leftover. This was always a thing for me in The Walking Dead too. They would like talk about how there was no place to get food, and I would always just have to wonder, there would be so many people that had already been eliminated from the population. And I was like, are there no like distribution warehouses that you can go and just get a pallet of fucking canned corn, like that sort of thing didn't come up often. And that was the sort of shit that would be very like compelling to me to know about, is even if a sort of chain of resources for storefronts get shut down because of an emergency situation, you still have people who like work in those areas and those buildings who would know that the resources were there and be able to capitalize on that somehow, whether it be hoarding for themselves or hoarding and then selling, various ways of handling that. But anyway, the premise here, which is that it's cheaper to use human beings, I just don't think it's that simple. The fact that he's experimenting with making cyborgs, to me, points more to Rob is trying to figure out where human beings fit in the chain of like the circle of life, the food chain. But maybe I'm wrong. It's just a weird, there's a lot more going on, as we see in a later section, with Rob beginning to look at life and try to imitate it or foster it somehow. And I don't understand his motivations on that. So I slip away while the others are being processed. A couple of patched up big happies watch and play pre-recorded commands while the line of people ditch their clothes and suitcases in a pile. I remember this: the shower, coveralls, bunk assignment, work assignment, and at the end we were all marked. My mark is still with me. There's a subdermal tag the size of a grain of rice embedded deep in my right shoulder. After we're inside the camp and everyone has thrown off their belongings, I simply walk away. A big happy follows me as I cross the field toward the big metal building, but my mark identifies me as compliant. If I were out of compliance, the machine would crush my windpipe with its bare hands. I've seen it happen. The detectors all over the camp seem to recognize my tag. No alarms are set off. Thank God they didn't blacklist my number after dumping me off in that field. Big Happy retreats as I skirt around the camp toward the work barn. So, as she goes through the doors, that's when something picks up on the fact that she isn't supposed to be here. Her work detail isn't scheduled for that day. So she has to think fast, and there are hundreds of people in there. They wear blue coveralls and paper face masks and stand alongside the belts, taking pieces from bins and connecting them to what's on the conveyor belt and pushing them down the rollers. It's an assembly line. And all I could think of was like, an iPhone factory. I glanced down to see that today they're building what we call tanklets. They sort of, they look sort of like big four-legged mantises, but are the size of a small dog. We didn't know what they were at all until one day a new guy, an Italian soldier, said that these things hang on the bellies of mantises and drop off during battle. He said that sometimes broken ones could be rewired and used as emergency equipment. Said they called them ticklers. So that's so creepy to me. Just like the number of things that Rob is doing to imitate things that exist in nature, and when she goes in and the big happy steps in, obviously targeting her because she's not supposed to be here, she looks around and sees like that everybody has stopped moving and nobody is making a single move to help her. And she's not even resentful of it. She's just like, oh yeah, no, if I were in their shoes, I absolutely wouldn't either. Like, that's a death sentence. We all know better than to be doing this. So if I am choosing to break the rules, then I am choosing to take upon myself the potential consequences for doing this, which is getting my windpipe crushed. So she's running away from the big happy. Evidently, the big happy can't like keep up speed wise, but there's sort of like this inexorable nature, as if it's like you're going to slow down. Like eventually you're going to run out of steam. I won't, and I will be here still following you at this speed, and I'll just pin you down and it'll be fine. So she gets to this door and she can't open it. Matilda and Nolan are on the other side of this door and they need me, but instead I'm going to die in front of all these broken people in paper masks. And she can hear the Big Happy coming toward her. And she looks around the room and she uses this tanklet. The Big Happy is a foot away, arms out. Stumbling backward, I fall just out of reach and limp toward the steel door. I pull each tanklet leg out and press the abdomen against the door. The tanklet pulls its barbed legs into itself. With a wrenching squeal, they catch on the door and claw through the metal. I let go, and the tanklet clanks to the ground, arms grasping a 6-inch hunk of solid steel door. A ragged hole gapes where the doorknob and lock used to be. What? Just the fact that it can claw through something like that, it just is deeply upsetting. I do not like this development at all. And when she gets through in the dormitory, she's calling for the two of them, and she can't find them. And then all of a sudden, there's Nolan telling her she got hurt after you left, and she's in there. And that's when she goes in and finds Matilda being fucking operated on. Are you okay, honey? Can you see? Yes, I can. I can see inside the machines. And she gets Nolan and Matilda to the edge of the fence. The fence is only 5 feet high. It's part of the lure to would-be saviors on the outside looking in. The hidden sentry guns that lurk in the field are designed to be the real security enforcers. I'll always love you no matter what. What do you mean? Come on, please. Take Nolan and go, Matilda. Mom, I can't. There are guns. I can see them. Concentrate, honey. You have a gift now. See where the guns are, where they can shoot. Find a safe path. Take Nolan by the hand and don't let go. And eventually she has to use her mom voice and be like, you are going to go, and Nolan, you are going to listen to her. And it ends with no further record exists of Laura Perez. Matilda Perez, however, is another matter. So then we go to chapter sex. I wish. I'm surprised that there isn't robot sex happening, actually. I guess there's love robots, which we've heard about already. So, Bandemir, I think, this is the section with Paul Blanton, who is in Afghanistan, and he is with, what's his name? Jabbar, right. And, let's see. Krista says all the A's are long. A long A is an A sound, right? And a short A is an A sound. So Bandemir, the other way. So Bondemir. Like that. So let's see. What timing is this? New war plus 10 months. Okay. She says yes. Bondemir. Okay, cool. Thank you. So he was not executed, but it's sort of like he's on notice. And at one point they get attacked and he says something about how if I went back to the camp and I didn't have Jabbar with me, they would definitely kill me. It would be assumed that I had either done something or not done something. And Jabbar would be he's only got my back because he remembers that I saved his life one time, but I haven't really earned any sort of respect or trust from the rest of the community at all. We're so high up and the atmosphere is so thin it messes with you. I swear the light does funny things up here that it doesn't do other places. The shadows are too crisp, details are too sharp, like an alien planet. I know exactly what he means, and that is one of the most unnerving things, is when you are in a place where it's just off a little bit from the kind of atmosphere that you're used to from wherever you used to live. And it's just, it makes you constantly be like, am I in a dream? What is happening here? Jabbar spots it first, nudges me. A biped avtomat walks a narrow dirt road over a mile away, crossing the scrubland. I can tell it used to be a sap. Probably a hoplite model, judging from the height and light gait, but there's no telling. Lately, the machines have been changing. For example, the biped down there isn't wearing clothes like a sap would. It's made of some kind of dirt-colored fibrous material instead. It walks at a steady 5 miles per hour, shadows stretching out in the dirt behind, as mechanical as a tank rolling across desert sands. And Jabbar later on says, things are changing, and anything that's different is bad. Which I have to agree in this context. That your enemy is evolving and nobody wants to see that. That's never a good sign for you. We're traveling across the broken landscape with just our backpacks, robes, and whip-like antennae that are about 8 feet long and made of thick black plastic that wobble with every step we take. They must have been scavenged off some other machine or over the last 50 years. Using our antenna, we can pick up Avtomat radio comms and figure out their directionality. This way, we track Avtomat movements and send warnings to other people. So, it says, we usually stay a half mile apart from each other. Being so far apart helps determine the direction. Plus, if one of us gets hit by a missile, the other can have some time to hoof it or hide. So they take their final reading for the day, and they sit down and are taking a bit of a break. And it looks like the biped Avto went just over the next ridge and stopped. They don't sleep, so who knows what it's up to over there. It must not have sensed us because it's not raining bullets. As it gets dark, the ground radiates all the day's heat up into the sky. The heat is our only camouflage. So this is when they have the conversation about anything different is bad. And he finishes this with basically, and we had no idea how completely things were changing. Bondamir used to be a national park, but we're still in Afghanistan, meaning that a bronze plaque never stopped the locals from fishing here with dynamite. Not the friendliest approach, but I've used a trot line or two myself back in Oklahoma. Even with the dynamite and leaky gasoline boats and sewer lines, Bondamir stood the test of time. It outlasted the locals. So, they are, he sees an Avtomat that, the tracks from it. And it's going down this really rocky slope. And they decide that they are going to follow it. They go backward. After 30 minutes, we're only halfway down. And then all of a sudden, Jabbar stops and is like, something is coming. And he hears this low moan. And he's like, dude, what's going on? And Jabbar's like, there's a snowcat. And understandably, he's like, there's a what? Those live here? And Jabbar's like, we didn't think so. We thought they were gone. And this fucking wildcat attacks them. And he has to kill it. And he's genuinely super bummed about having to kill it. But gotta do what you gotta do. And once they have it down, Jabbar is like, what is this? And it says just under the cat's jaw is some kind of Avtomat-made collar. A pale gray band made of hard plastic is wrapped around the cat's neck. At one point, the strip widens into a marble-sized orb. On the back of the circular part, a tiny red light pulses. So, this is really interesting because, the fact that he says they used to be extinct, but apparently not anymore, either this is like a fully like manufactured wildcat, which I don't think there's blood and whatnot. I think they'd be able to tell the difference. Or somehow Rob just tracked one down that actually is out there and fitted it with a collar that can control it somehow. Or I don't know. But that just like the fact that he's using wildlife in this way just feels like a bad sign. The trajectory of the radio collar transmissions leads across the nearest lake to a small inlet. So eventually they see the footprints of some sap unit. We walk around the corner and come face to face with the next stage of Avtomot evolution. It sits half submerged in the lake, the biggest Avtomot imaginable. It's like a building or giant gnarled tree. And basically what this is it's created an ecosystem around itself. The top towers into the sky. An almost fractal pattern of bark-like structure whirls and twines in an organic mass of what looks like branches. Thousands of birds nest in the safety of these limbs. Wind sighs through the tangled boughs, pushing them back and forth. And on the lower levels, stepping carefully, are a few dozen of the biped Avtomata. They are inspecting other life forms, leaning over and watching, prodding, pulling, like gardeners. Each of them covers a different area. They're muddy, wet, and some are covered in moss themselves. This doesn't seem to bother them. And this is when he begins to realize, like, oh, this is the opposite of a weapon. This is like life. And it looks like it's a sort of research station. And they are able to track how much data is being sent out. Wherever it's going, I'll bet there's one smart fucking Avtoma on the other end. Jabbar, go east 50 meters and plant your stick. I'll do the same. We're going to figure out where our enemy lives. Paul was correct. What he and Jabbar had found was not a weapon, but a biological research platform. The massive amount of data it collected was being sent via tight beam transmission to a remote location in Alaska. So then we get Chapter 7, Backbone. And this is, I believe, the last of Lurker. So this starts with commentary again. As Bright Boy Squad continued to trek across the U.S., we marched in an information vacuum. A lack of satellite communication plagued the survivors, preventing widespread groups from collaborating and fighting together. Lurker pinpointed the source of the jamming signal. His attempt to do something sent reverberations through human and Rob history. In the following pages, I describe what happened to Lurker based on street camera recordings, exoskeleton data logs, and partially the first-person account of a sub-mind of Arcos itself. So, Lurker is with Artrod, and it seems pretty clear that Artrod's kids are dead. And Lurker is like feeling some regret for the way that he handled things and actually apologizes to him. And they're in these giant fucking exoskeletons that make them look really badass. But I definitely was like, yo, why are you putting your body in the thing that is like, it's in a robot? Dude, like, and that does indeed wind up being what sorts of happens later. They get taken over, but he's still able to accomplish what he intended. But I just kept thinking about like in Iron Man 2, and they have like the suit that goes wrong and it spins like 360 and breaks the guy's spine kind of thing. Like that was what I kept picturing, and I was just like, this is a bad idea. And they are going into this area. I'm going to read this bit. The British telecom tower. It's jamming our satellites. If people could communicate even for a little while, we have a fighting chance. And this is when Artrod is like, no, but seriously, why are you doing this? And Lurker admits, like, we had superiority complexes. And the thing is, we definitely are all on the same fucking team here. and we owe it to people to make up for the shit that we did. And we have knowledge that is very specified, and we have a responsibility to do this thing, which just shows how major a personality shift he has undergone, which can happen. You know, I think a lot of us, if we like went and talked to who we were a couple of years ago, it would be really startling to see the shit that we still like believed or were okay with. And he tells Artrod that he owes him too. And then basically finishes with, "Do you want to die of old age on a boat with me?" And Artrod's like, all right, you make a very good point. A fine fucking point. So they head through Trafalgar Square, and they have all of these, like, there's a bunch that happens here, but I'm out of time, so I'm going to have to sort of like jump to the end here. What ends up happening is that Lurker's suit gets taken over and he winds up killing Artrod. And it's so sad because Artrod doesn't seem to realize that's what's happening. So he appears to give Lurker a look of betrayal, you know? And Lurker's like, "It's not me, I'm so sorry." But I'm sure that they knew this was a possibility. So this is when Arcos chirps Lurker and says something like, "Oh, you're not a coward anymore. I'm sorry it has to be this way." Lurker thrusts his arm out and grabs hold of a delicate feeler, trying to break it off. The shoulder joint of his right arm pops as he struggles against a sudden push from the exoskeleton. He can only watch as his right arm swings through the air and in one sharp movement slices his left hand off at the wrist. Dodging another forearm blade, he drops to the ground and rolls through Artrod's spreading blood. The exoskeleton is off balance for a split second, missing its human counterweight. It's just enough time for Lurker to wriggle over the lip of the hole. Ching! A forearm blade bites into the floor inches from Lurker's face as he shoves himself into the hole, cradling his injured arm to his chest. Half falling, he drops down into the darkness. The unmanned exoskeleton picks up the fallen one with Artrod's corpse inside and then sprints out the door. Hanging over the hole, the complex piece of machinery watches patiently. Lights on the equipment racks begin to flicker as a flood of data pours out of the tower, a last-minute backup. Long moments pass before a hoarse voice echoes up from the dark hole. "Catch you in the funny pages, mate," says Lurker, and the world turns white and then to darkest black. So I guess he had either a bomb on him or he like did something while he was down there, but this was a little bit unclear for me and I wasn't totally sure. It says later, "I know because in the moment before the British telecom tower exploded, Lurker recorded a 15-second message that saved humankind from certain destruction." So it definitely blows up, but I just wasn't sure how that happened. And I'm very interested to find out what the message said. So I'm over time, so I have to wrap up. But thank you again, Krista, for commissioning this. I hope that you guys are enjoying the coverage and find it interesting. And I will be seeing you all again on Friday with a new episode. So until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.